Hey, welcome to the afternoon panel. Obviously, last couple panels are always fun to be in, especially after Bill Gates is done and everybody's already checked out. Hey, what the hell? We'll have some fun. So this is on the bridging the last mile gap. The world is a little bit different outside of the United States, especially as you get to the emerging economies. We figured we'd chat a little bit about what kind of last mile problems there are, and we're not only talking about just connectivity gaps, but gaps in practically anything and everything that you might take for granted in other parts of the world. We'll basically try to figure out how people have sort of dealt with that, what business models are around that, how have people dealt with the technology challenges, or what have you. I'll just ask that each of you introduce yourselves as I get to you in the first questions. Neville, will start with you, and I'll let you introduce yourself and then talk to us a little bit about, from your perspective, you've worked on all different parts of the globe. What's different, say, in India or Africa that's different from here?
Okay, fine. All right. Okay, so my name is Neville Taraporewalla. I'm the president of BCCL Worldwide Inc., which is 100% US subsidiary of a large media conglomerate, which is the Times of India Group in India. We set up base last 2015, mid-2015, and we're looking at assisting companies from the United States to find their way into India. I think that's what I do right now, and that's my job. And having worked with multinationals before, like Microsoft and Yahoo in India, I think one of the significant challenges that one faces when you're operating in emerging markets as well as India is specifically got to do with the fact that these are large markets. These are not just one city markets. And increasingly, when I meet people out here, they really talk about, hey, can I do India in a span of 3 days? And it's not possible in 3 days, because you need to go to Bombay, you need to go to Delhi, you need to understand the ground realities. I think so there's a question of, the landscape being so large. I think that's fundamentally a very important thing that you need to remember when you actually land into some of these markets. I think the second issue is got to do with languages. I think if there is a product service which you are sort of launching in that market, you need to be significantly aware of the fact that across the country you have different languages. While English is the language which drives it, but there are opportunities in the vernacular sectors also. And I think the most important thing is that India is a mobile first market. And I believe a number of companies are not yet geared up to deliver any kind of a service effectively over the mobile device, purely because of the challenges of the device itself. So I think there are a number of challenges, and the most important thing, which probably sounds like a plug, but what we try to do is really finally help the last mile, and that's the subject out here, bridging the last mile, which is you may have a great product service, but at the end of the day, I just can't get the consumers, the customers. Fundamentally, what we do is really try to help these organizations to get those customers, which is significantly a challenge in a market like India.
Shantanu, you want to speak a little bit about some of the infrastructure challenges that you've already faced, connectivity, power, teachers.
So I run Schoolguru. Schoolguru happens to be one of the online learning management companies there back in India. We have started operating in India as well as in Africa now. We help universities bring their legacy courses online. So that's what we do basically. We face several challenges actually, Gaurav. I mean, we have been hearing several sessions here, how do you personalize learning, how do you improve learning outcomes, how do you actually improve completion rates. Back there, the problem is how do you actually make basic education available to people? How do you make it accessible to people? So we all understand that the technology-led education framework has to sit on a telecom network, and that's not being there in major part of these geographies is a major constraint. So how do you teach online to a student who doesn't have access to computer and doesn't have access to broadband internet connection? So that's a major challenge that we have. Second challenge that I normally encounter, I'm sure every educator encounters, is the lack of availability of good quality faculty members, right? So, and that's a challenge in most of these developing countries. So how can you replicate a very good quality faculty members across multiple universities and hundreds of thousands of students? That's something that we want to do. And having said that, we all understand that education at the end of the day is not a mechanistic process. It doesn't, it's one size fit all doesn't work. It's not a system where you can just keep on perfecting it and start replicating it across different institutions and it all hums along well. It doesn't work like that. It's an organic process, right? So it works with life, it works with light, it has romance. And having said that, if you have to still personalize education, if you have to drive learning outcomes, I'm sure organization like ours and an organization like Harman's, I mean, we are working on various innovative techniques, tools, and methods to ensure that we still deliver those type of learning outcomes.
We'll come back to some of the solutions in a little bit. Harman, you want to speak to some of the challenges you faced? You're building LMSs on the cloud and selling across the globe. So you're doing that out of India.
Right. So I'm Harman Singh. I'm the founder of the company called WizIQ.com. Our customers are education service providers. That means from anybody who's an independent tutor, somebody who runs an academy or even a college or university. However, our focus is mostly in the mid-sized segment. And what we offer is, so all these guys want to ride the wave of online education, which is, to me, still coming. It's not there yet. We have all the signs. So all these guys want to do that. So where do they go? So we offer a cloud-based DIY platform where they can come and launch their own online academies. Now, we've taken the problem from the software standpoint, and we are solving it through software. So it's a mobile app you need for mobile learning, that's available. It's a virtual classroom you need. So all the pieces are there. You just come in there, sign up, and get started. Now, so while building software, which is cloud-based mobile, while our customers are all over the globe, even in the US and many other developed nations, a decent chunk of our customers are in India, in Africa, and places like these in emerging markets. And some of the challenges that we have seen are unheard of here. For example, hey, students would say, I can't really stream a video. Can I download it, right? And you're like, wow, we have put together all these CDNs and whatnot, and you want to download the video, but but he's right. He doesn't have. He does have Wi-Fi somewhere, but when he's on the go, he might have 3G. 3G in India is really poor. So you build a feature like that. You do a virtual classroom for real-time teaching. Hey, you can do that, but we can't do video, right? Can you make it audio or chat enabled? And then you suddenly realize, in the age of Skype and Google Hangout, these students and the service providers want that. So there are many such challenges. And then, while we all, the industry claims that everybody's on a smartphone now, but you really see the smartphones in the emerging markets are really dumb smartphones, right? They are, $50 smartphones, hardly any CPU power in it or memory in it, right? My QA team comes back and asks for more such devices to test because we get complaints, right? And in fact, in my left pocket, I hold one such device. It's a $60 device, and I test my own software on it every time. So challenges like these.
All right, let me tell a couple anecdotes just so everybody has a little bit of a sense of the kind of world we face here, right? 1.8 million schools in India. Out of that, about only 300,000 are private schools. Of that, only about 80,000 teach in any level of English. And if you really get to a quality school system of a board that is recognized, the government board that the curriculum is affiliated to, only about 18,000 schools out of that 1.8 million are in what would be the centrally recognized board, the CBSE board. So it's and the problem is, outside of that 18,000, the average classroom is still, a little chalkboard, and maybe a teacher attends or doesn't attend the school at all, especially if it's out in a village. There may be no power, no internet connectivity. Fans and lights, who heard of that stuff? It's still coming. That's really what we're dealing with. So, here we're in a conference talking about tablets and learning analytics and student analytics crunched together so that we can sort of leave no child behind and personalized learning. And what you have is a problem of just complete lack of access. And interestingly, technology is one of the best ways to try to begin to solve this at the scale that's required. The good part is there's been quite a bit of motion. So I remember going back to India in the late 90s. So here's my little anecdote. We set up a small software company. A couple of days later, all our phone lines went dead. We had like 4 different phone numbers because you wouldn't know which one would die, right? This is the good old landlines and the old nationalized phone service. Called up the phone company. Their guy showed up right away, which was a surprise. And we asked him what happened. He said, well, the problem is somebody came up last night, has dug the big cable outside your office building. They dug it up and stole about a 100-foot long piece for the copper. Well, that was the landline telecom stuff. That's no longer a problem. We leapfrogged that, went straight to mobile. 900 million cell phones today. Practically every man, woman, child has one. We were at a conference just the other day where we were talking to a gentleman who serves mobile learning out in South Africa, and we were talking about infrastructure constraints and don't you have to deal with feature phones. He says, no. I no longer have to deal with feature phones. I have to deal with the smartphones because everybody wants to take a selfie and Snapchat with their friends. It's the same. So the consumer actually, the young class, the young generation is still looking the same. It's similarly aspirational. They want to take the same selfies, and the peer pressure and the desire to sort of fit in is so high, they will find that $60 in an economy that probably that's a very large number still. The problem is your e-learning videos are jostling for space with the selfie, and he's going to have to keep deleting one or the other. That's the weird kind of different last mile infrastructure problem you've got to think about and deal with. So very different world. Everything gets flipped on its head, but everything also changes very rapidly. I think that's what we're finding. On the one side we have these shortages, but on the flip side, we're going through leapfrogging practically everything. We didn't have to go to desktops to then get to mobile. We didn't have to live through really bad old HTML e-learning to skip straight to video, if not streamed, but certainly downloaded to our devices now. So interesting world. Governments are getting behind it. Tablets are being distributed. Couldn't have imagined it a few years ago. But tablets are being distributed by the million across these markets. But they may not necessarily be live and connected.
Yep.
I think that's the thing to think about. Other constraints, other anecdotes that sort of drive home what the world has to be.
Yeah. I just wanted to share 2 bits of data out here. Typically India there are 2 Indias. The one India which you just talked about, the millennials, the young India which is ready for Snapchat, ready to consume all of that. I think they themselves have a challenge, and that's sort of a challenge there because data costs are high still in India. And you may have the best smartphone, but data costs needs to be lowered down. And I believe once the big Reliance comes into play, probably the cost might go down. But at this point of time, that's, according to me, a challenge. And the second part is that I talked about 2 Indias. Now, how do you cater to this first India, which has the smartphone, has the ability and the power to pay for content, which you will, for e-learning content on the phone, while there's another set, like Shantanu talked about, which you need to find different ways in which to connect with them. So I think those are major, I would say, infrastructure challenges which needs to be simultaneously addressed if you want to make it education inclusive, which is what is the original agenda of the government, that they want to make education inclusive. But how are you going to provide connectivity to the second part of India, which still is really, really poor in terms of connectivity?
So it's interesting you talk about 2 Indias because that's what we talk about at our office back in India. Really, you cannot see India as one country. You should look at it as 3 countries or at least 2. Now, let's take the example of 2 countries within India, the top 30% and the rest of the 70%. Top 30%, we're talking about 350 million people, right? That's larger than the US population. Now, this population has all kinds of smartphones. The better, half of them probably have iPhones. They have at least 5 megabits per second at home at least. They pay for everything, and their paying capacity for educational services is a lot more than of the families here in the US. In India, luckily or unluckily, we don't have much of government education. Now, the top 30%, they don't access those services. They don't need them. So they pay for all educational services. For example, they start with private tutoring to test prep services to later on all continuing education. They pay from their pocket. They're very value conscious, but they pay a lot. In fact, some of our customers who are in the test prep segment, they're a lot more successful in India than they are in the US, and not at all in Canada, for example, right? So there are some amazing advantages of the education for the education industry in India. One of them being that the market is open for the top 30%, and the people are ready to consume services, pay out of the pocket.
Just to add to what you said just now, Harman, I mean, if you look at actually the numbers of people who go to different type of institutions and universities, I think about 85% of the higher education students actually go to government universities, public universities. And an average spend of a student, annual spend, is less than about $100, right? So you have to provide this high quality, great learning outcome, employable, engaging education at less than $100 per annum. That's one of the biggest challenges. So if you have to build a business in India, you have to build a business which makes sense within that type of an amount. So that's one of the biggest challenges.
So are you saying an average student in higher education in India pays $100 a year?
$100 a month, I would think.
I would doubt that now. In the last 10 years, when the private colleges have kind of surged up. So yeah, I take your point. I'm sure that information is at least partly correct. In K-12, right, I would say the top 30% of the socioeconomic segment in India would probably be mostly private schooling. Yeah. Would that be fair to say?
Sure.
Right. Yeah. Higher education hasn't caught up in the private sector as much as the K-12, but so that's there you go.
So interesting dichotomy, right? On the one hand, there's a lack of infrastructure, lack of all sorts of things. But on the flip side, just to quantify what you were talking about, the average Asian family will pay up to a third of its income to educate its children.
Yep.
There's no free schooling, there's no free lunches, well, very few, and they will put that money out, and that's the single biggest thing they will put out separate from the home they live in. And that's just how it is in that part of the world, because education is massively aspirational, changes lives completely.
Yep.
And I was just listening to somebody yesterday talking about the African context, where literally people are paying, the village gets together to send the kid to college.
Yep, that's
you teach a child, you teach a village. It literally is that way. The village is teaching the child. And so you have this deep desire and deep motivation on the one hand that lets you cross that last mile in many, many, many different ways. And I think I would love to talk about some of the solutions that you've seen. How have people gotten around it? Let me set the ball rolling. If you look at content distribution, we take it for granted here that the content will be sitting on a cloud server. You come on up, you consume what you want, you get to Coursera, you get to any of the MOOCs. Again, that 30% is consuming that, and that 30% is likely to consume it on a mobile device or a cheap tablet in our part of the world. In Africa, where again, we came across a company that is building ruggedized tablets that are fit to be carried around. That's literally the school, solar powered, standalone little tablets, disconnected, only had the content downloaded. In India, what we're seeing is one of the major publishers, and actually a number of them, they are not only putting the cloud service on for the content distribution, they also do embedded distribution in the tablet. They will distribute CDs, and they'll distribute little memory sticks through regular retail channels all over the country. So it's a multimodal distribution model. The content is still arriving. It may be in an SD card that clips into your feature phone and you can watch it, but it'll happen. It's just, they've just built the distribution chain to manage that differential. And the price point has been dropped to match what people need.
Let me just add to what you said, Gaurav, rightly. Actually, we deal with close to about 14 of the large government universities in India. And this is exactly the model these universities are following. So if you typically go and take admission in one of the distance education programs of these universities, apart from the printed study material, that universities also give you a small chip which you're supposed to put on your phone. The chip actually enables an app which is a hybrid app, which is a fairly intelligent hybrid app, which delivers the content offline, so the students do not have to download videos. However, it also needs internet connection sporadically so that it can start interacting on a lot of administrative matters. For example, it does calendaring, it does student servicing, it does fees payment, it does social media for the students, so many other things. So a student can actually use this hybrid app so that even if he's in a disconnected type of a zone, he still has access to the pre-recorded video lectures. He can go through them. And whenever he has access to internet, whenever sporadically possibly, he can actually go ahead and interact and get engaged. What interestingly the universities are also doing to bridge this gap about interactivity, how do you actually take care of that part of it? Most of our universities follow a blended learning approach. So what the university said is that, for example, one of the large state universities there has set up a lot of study centers in smaller district areas, said that students who do not have access to broadband internet connection at all and cannot access these virtual classrooms have an option to come to these classrooms, and they are pre-scheduled, few numbers in a year though. However, since the students have actually consumed the lectures already earlier, this time in the classroom can actually be used for human interaction, right? And for interactivity. And that's blended learning actually has helped a lot.
So, Gaurav and Shantanu, like when you're talking about content, for example, he talked about blended learning. So one other observation that we have from the Indian market is that it's not a DIY market, right? Neither on the service provider side or not even on the student side. It's a highly service-oriented, touch-oriented market. On one side, you can't sell without a touch happening. You can't sell over the phone. On the other hand, even the students and the parents expect an instructor in the classroom to teach them. So while Coursera's and Udemy's and plural sites exist, they're only supplemental tools. They're probably replacing books, right? That market does not outsource the learning to video content. Video content can supplement it, but the learning they prefer is instructor-led, whether it's in the classroom, like in a blended fashion, or online. So that is one of the different things.
Yeah, so there is a US company which we are currently engaging with, which is actually, what both the two of them said is talking about a highly touch market. So this US particular company is actually having it's a skills-based learning, and they have a hybrid program where you do a lot of it online, and then there's going to be a little bit of a touch on the ground. And one of the things which we are doing with this particular organization is actually working with them through some of the educational institutions that we as a media company have invested in India, and getting them to do this whole online, offline hybrid model. Because as Harman said, it's definitely a little bit of touch which is required, but it works when you have that working.
Yeah, other interesting models that we've seen, you take a lack of teachers in tier 3 universities or tier 3 K-12 schools, for example. We've actually seen new companies pop up whose entire model is about delivering specific newer age curricula right into the university. So the model is very straightforward. They basically pick specific courses, could be data sciences, could be whatever else is hot and employability oriented, or could be a deep core skill that university just can't offer. They tie up with the school at the far end in a tier 3 college. Correct. They train the teachers, they're collecting the teachers, they're sending them out. They're beginning to beam that in as well into the college wherever the pipes are good. But for a number of places, they're just bringing the teacher into the college. So they're literally just filling the teacher gap and filling the new age curriculum gap at the same time. Does two interesting things. The student gets a better learning. It's a better outcome by the time they get their degree. The college actually lifts their fee because now it's much more relevant and much more employable, and everybody wins. And that's become a business model in the whole place. And we're seeing a number of players starting to verticalize this. There are people going at IT degrees, design degrees, augmenting this. We're starting to see the beginnings of career counseling arrive online now.
Yes.
From a country that had no counselors and no real notion of counselors other than ask your parents and ask the family, we're suddenly seeing businesses being built around career counseling simply over phone. And sort of, just the occasional phone call and a WhatsApp or a Snapchat conversation. Heard an interesting one the other day. Somebody's trying to teach English language training. You can do this in the device. There are stuff that can sort of understand your language and speak back to you. This guy's not doing this. This is the simplest, most beautiful little elegant solution I ever heard. The way these guys work, there's a tutor at the far end. You have a WhatsApp link. He has you speak into the WhatsApp and send a little audio text over. The teacher listens to it and says good or not. And it just works just fine for him.
Yeah.
So, they can do it on the go. It's just a WhatsApp-enabled, do it on the go, English language tutoring center. Little tiny one out of Pune in India.
Right. Wow. Another US company which has just landed their course curriculum in India, which is Udacity. And one of the things they've tried to do, as he mentioned, 1/3 of the monthly income is spent on education for the children. And the ultimate objective is, if I spend so much of money on the education of the child, I hope that it's going to land me a job. I think there's a correlation between the two very clearly. And one of the things which Udacity has done is it's going to some of these key marquee companies and saying, hey, you know what, in India, my son has done X, Y, Z, but if he goes through the nano degree from Udacity online, will you give them preference over those who don't complete a nano degree? Okay, so because their theory is that the curriculum currently is not tailored to what some of these companies want. When they're hiring IT engineers and software programmers, etc. They go through this program, but ultimately they are not geared for an employment. So the nano degree, which they seem to be retailing or e-tailing online, and then they've gone to these companies and saying, hey, I'm giving you this software programmer who's gone through the nano degree. He knows exactly what you want at work, and you should give them a preference. So, I mean, companies need to do creative things to sell their programs and ensure they get the right talent, right customers.
Other examples, we talked about skipping the last mile of connectivity using, multimodal distribution strategies for content or disconnected strategies. We've seen power being skipped simply by gensets in the old days. I mean, a number of us came out of the software industry. We used to whine about power and infrastructure for the first couple of years, and then every building that was built, because everybody was opening a software company, every builder built a building that he put a whole bunch of generation capacity into, and suddenly you didn't have a problem anymore from at least the point of the company doing business.
Right.
So local solutions do get found to all of these problems. On the teacher shortage, what's happened is as IT companies have, as the ed tech companies and the tech-enabled businesses for tutoring online have really gotten going, we're suddenly finding that the Uberization of teaching has arrived. Anybody's a teacher for a few hours a day, and suddenly that's linking up. And so suddenly, where you used to have a teacher shortage to teach in a school, there's just no shortage of tutors anymore.
Yeah, that's true. Interestingly, our software has been used over the last 5 years by many tutoring companies here in the US, and I would say at least half of those companies have tutors back in India, right? And this same is the case for companies in the UK.
Sure.
So I know of so many tutoring companies back in India operating for the past 5 or 7 years who have been teaching American kids, right? Now these are also the guys who started tutoring for India, right? So they knew the logistics, they knew how it will all work. So that's very interesting. And just add to that, as I was with the a very large telco, Reliance Jio is launching in India. So what that is, it's a $3 a month LTE based service, right? They, as of now, they're yet to launch, right? They, as of now, have set up in at least 60,000 villages, and the lowest bandwidth in any village is 11 megabits per second, right? So as soon as that comes, suddenly this whole shift is going to happen because the service providers are ready, the content is ready, right? The consumers are ready. So it's the middle infrastructure that has been missing, and I think that's going to be there in just in the next few months, definitely this year.
But contrary to what you're saying, I still feel that some of these villages need electricity just for their basic needs, and which is the challenge.
Well, it is.
I mean, that's what the government needs to really do. Apart from the fact, because you can't get them to learn if you don't have electricity and basic needs. I think it's a great thing if the 60,000 villages have been connected. But I think they should have probably got 60,000 villages to get electricity first before they.
Well, they've been working at it. Actually, the numbers were quite impressive. The most recent numbers they put out, at least electricity has arrived to quite a few places now. Is it available all day? That's a different conversation.
So,
but the line is there now and does turn on.
One of the implications, one of the implications of all this, be it the power, the internet, for the education industry is that 2 years from now, going to the country, going to India and setting it up would be too late. Just like nobody saw China coming up, and certainly the largest internet economy. Same way, India is going to be the same, especially for online education.
So that's an interesting point because the question then becomes: is this all this complaints about the last mile infrastructure? Is that a problem? Or is that almost a natural entry barrier? If you don't, if you can figure out your business model to deal with that, then the numbers you can reach across the globe are just unbelievable. So I mean, look at what Andela has done with just sort of creating a business model that allows kids from Africa to start learning computer skills and turn them into interns, and they're productive, and it's just an amazing little model. Right. So is this really an impediment, or is this just cost of doing business and you just got to fix for that constraint?
So I think as far as we are concerned, our business is concerned, it's just a perspective because, as I said, 300 million Indians are ready, right? The last mile problem lies for the 70%. I think what we haven't talked about in the last mile access is the capital. The capital isn't there yet to that can trust entrepreneurs to build large businesses in education. I've seen that time and again, because if you really see,
you're just saying that because I'm investing capital in education.
By the way, he's invested his money in my business, so we're good there. But that I see as a problem. For example, Gaurav, if you see, let's see the success stories from the last 2 years in the internet world, right? It's the Indian Uber, the Indian Amazon, the Indian Yelp, right? But all of these, some US equivalent already exists, which means the investors there, especially the larger ones, who would invest 50 million upwards, want to see that proven somewhere else. And now the thing is, in the US, pretty much education industry hasn't proved anything. Right? So there are no parallels to be seen in the US for the Indian investors to say, hey, it happened there, let's do it here.
So I just
so that is to me
dissension on the panel. Go.
I want to give a he talked about capital, so I wanted to give a slightly different perspective. I'm not contrary to his, but just to give you a different perspective, and that comes from the fact that I come from a media house. So we have something called Times Global Partners, and Coursera is something which we have partnered with Times Global Partners, and we're taking them there. But let's look at one of our solutions, which is called Brand Capital. Just to give you numbers, we've invested in educational institutions, not necessarily e-learning institutions, distance learning institution, other institutions like Amity University in Delhi, etc., where we have put media capital because, like I said, the landscape is extremely complex. Media costs to acquire customers for these companies is expensive. So what we did is we created something where we said, hey, why don't we partner with you? Why don't we get you to leverage our media, which will help you build your brand and reach your customers? And that was music to ears to some of them. And just to give you numbers, we have invested in almost 90 different educational companies across the country, not necessarily online. They are across real world universities in different parts of India, of which about 55 of our investments are actually live. All right, and there's almost a commitment of about 100 million worth of media capital, which is available to these institutions. And just so that you know, all media forms are growing in India, whether it's print, television, internet, or radio, etc. Just the traditional media has got about 87% attribution to generate customers. So in real terms, there is a model whereby the media capital can be in different forms. I mean, the capital can be in different forms, cash plus the media that we give. I think it's worked beautifully for some of these institutions in order to reach their customers because of the complexity of the market to reach them. Digital is, of course, through the digital entities of ours, they reach out, but we've gone and said, hey, let's take the traditional media forms and see how you can acquire these customers. So we have pumped in a lot of media capital for educational institutions across the country.
I would just to pick up the thread from what you said, actually, Gaurav. These are the challenges that we are facing there. Call it entry barriers or challenges, but they exist. You can't deny them. And the average awareness about the quality of education in countries like India and the emerging markets are very, very high. People expect high quality education even if they pay less than $100, right? So the challenges for companies like ours is how do you still deliver high quality, engaging, employable education, still making profits out of it? That's the big challenge for us. And I'm sure companies like ours, we have figured out innovative solutions for it. For example, we know that I need to communicate with the student continuously. If internet doesn't work, my app starts using SMS as a channel to start communicating with the servers, for example. Right? I understand that we need to personalize education. Without that, nobody's ready to take up just delivery of content. How do you do that when the student is not always connected? So the app keeps on logging in all the behavioral pattern of the students. And whenever it gets opportunity, it throws the entire stuff back on the server. So when it analyzes it and throws the personalized data to the app in itself back, so the student actually starts seeing what he needs to see. So I think people have started working on innovative solutions to ensure they adjust themselves to this market and still provide high quality education.
Yeah. Let's pick up one more thread on just last mile infrastructure that affects, frankly, any business. Payments.
Yeah.
Payments and financing. Yeah. Look, again, the economy, it's mostly still a cash economy. Yeah. Credit cards have been arriving, growing very rapidly. Yeah. People didn't have bank accounts. There was just no banking. Banking wasn't online. And that's true. Well, India, obviously, the situation is changing, but the other parts of Africa, other parts of Asia are also similar. And then student financing hasn't existed. People pay out of their pockets. Yeah. So how does that impact businesses? What do you guys have had to deal with around some of these areas? And what have people done, and what maybe new things that are happening around the area?
Yeah. So while we don't, in our business model, don't yet at least directly have the students paying us, but indirectly through our customers, they pay them. And so I have some observation there. So this payments, larger payments is definitely a problem. For example, anything above $200, even that is a pretty large amount, nobody pays online, right? There'll be hardly people paying that stuff online. Having said that, there have been very innovative, now very large companies, the Indian PayPal, right? The Paytm company, they're all on mobile payments, right? And 3 years ago, they didn't even exist. So, and they have a huge backing of large investors to take the hit on those payments, and they're offering solutions like EMIs, the installments, and so on. So I think that infrastructure is in play, and I think it's still being built, and I think that's going to solve it. So right now, that's a problem. Anything above $200 in transaction, even for the top 30% of the population, is almost not a possibility.
I wouldn't say it's not a possibility. I think that top 30%, they have an option. I think it's all got to do with trust. I don't think they want to do it because of trust, because I don't think the banking channels really the banks themselves do enough to build trust. For example, if you use your credit card and you return it, you don't get your money back on your credit card for 7 weeks until you make several phone calls. So I think that's a very simple thing. Why would I use the card if that doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
While if you just look at that, just reverse the scenario and see it in the United States, in a much more developed market, it's instant. I've got my refunds like within 24 hours or within under 24 hours. I go, I return an item, even online, it's instant.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the most important thing which we have forgotten probably out here, and pardon me if I'm treading on anybody's toes, is just simple customer service. Okay. I feel that that's a huge challenge in that market. While we've got the most educated set of people, but I think customer service plays a huge, it's a huge advantage if you have a great customer service rep on the other side. If my app is not downloading, or if I have not received something, I've paid for it, how many times do I easily get through a customer service person? And they are bound by so many rules. It's such an unpleasant experience, and that's an area, that's a challenge.
You're absolutely right.
So we need to improve that. I think that is one of the things which some of the companies that I advise really tell them to build a great customer service experience for your customers. So even if you have 10,000 customers, you don't need 100,000 customers, you have 10,000 paying customers. Please ensure that when someone calls in, there's someone to talk to them, someone who's empathetic towards what that challenge is, because of connectivity has so many variables, right from the device to internet to the telecom provider to your service provider. So how do you address all of those things?
See,
so I think that's a big challenge.
Interestingly, so what we have seen is that even in online education, when students subscribe to a course or pay for a course, they accept a 24/7 call center, right? Now, this is another example of a touch-oriented, service-oriented market where Coursera and Udemy just cannot survive, right? You need a 24/7 call center for every student that enrolls in your course, right? And the service providers who have done that, they're flourishing.
Gaurav, I actually deal with the bottom 70% of the population, right? So whereas he talked about the top 30%, I deal with the bottom 70%, and I'm seeing definitely a behavioral shift in the type of students that they pay. So if you look at the type of universities that we deal with, all of these 14 universities who cumulatively would have an addressable base of close to about 3 million students between them, 80% of the payments are done online using either mobile devices, card, net banking, stuff like that. 80% of the payments today are happening online, and that's a huge behavioral shift.
Well, yeah, thank you very much, because I was going to make the same point, because while we didn't have all of this stuff, suddenly with mobile devices coming in, the accessibility to payments and wanting to buy online sort of arrived. So between a Flipkart and an Amazon arriving in country, mobile arriving, and a Paytm arriving, you've actually closed the loop right around the banking system. So these are all perfect examples of an opportunity that otherwise looked like, what are you going to do there? Whoever does payments online, who will ever use a telephone, right? Has 900 million mobile users in every corner using online payments to pay 80% from the bottom of the pyramid to do 5 rupee. That's a nickel recharge at a time. But for a prepaid card.
So this is exactly what we need. What we need to really look at is that you actually built this little world, but there are inefficiencies in all of that. So what I learned through my experience at companies like Microsoft is really how do you address those efficiencies? You already have now built. You're right. There's Amazon coming in. There are huge marketing budgets which Amazon spends, and we are a recipient of that, to be very honest, our different media assets. Flipkart does that, and all the VC money probably comes back, so marketing. But what that has done is that people have got more involved in purchasing online. But sometimes these inefficiencies actually drive them away. And I think if we address those inefficiencies, I think you're only going to see the market scale, whether it's for education, for anything else.
Yeah, so I think I'll begin to wind down. The last few minutes here, we'll leave it open to the audience for questions. But just to recap, I mean, look, across the emerging markets, this ability to have, we've seen a confluence of 2 or 3 things driving things. The world just doesn't look like it used to anymore, I think would be my much more optimistic view. the desire for education has always been there, ability, you know, even a willingness to spend on it has always been there. But now, because of mobile, because of the access of the world sort of collapsing in, because now you can see what else is out there, and this is how the young generation connects and consumes, it's moving things far more rapidly than would have otherwise ever been possible, which is leading, I think my contention would be, it leaves the door open for interesting business models that can be massively scaled, but they have to match the realities. It has to be about very high volumes at small price points, high customer service, high touch possibly even, or at least, you know, real human touch at key points in the cycle. But if you can do that, you can create all sorts of businesses. Remember, last year, I can't remember the exact number, but I think 5 unicorns came out of India. Now has 5 unicorns
in the top 100.
Out
the
there.
Top 25.
Yeah, out of the top 25, 5 of them are now out of India, all homegrown companies. Yeah. So that's happening. Couldn't have imagined just a few years ago. So I think these entry barriers can be just jumped, but if you try to take, you know, as Kellogg did before and others have, if you just take the product from here, walk it over, nobody ate breakfast cereal, you know, don't be surprised you didn't manage to sell any for the first few years.
Yeah.
You know,
now they're selling.
McDonald's doesn't come in and start selling beef burgers in India. Yeah, none of the burgers are made of beef. You know, you just can't pick it up and put it there and expect that they will consume. But you know, so just got to adapt and organize and just account for reality. So go ahead, please.
So just on what you just said, most people might be not knowing that Amazon changed their model for India.
Yeah,
I'm not an authority on Amazon, but they've just changed their model on India.
That's
so. I think India is highly aspirational. Okay, so they will consume good content if you give them, whether they are sitting in the 30% or the 70%. I believe that once you solve the inefficiencies, payments will not be an issue because your content is going to be really great. So I think if you address some of these issues, I think India is on the threshold as far as education is concerned, and we'll stick to education because that's what this you know, entire conference is all about. I don't see any reason why you're not going to see a unicorn in the edtech space coming out of India.
Well, we're watching, just by the way, we're just watching, if not unicorn, we're certainly watching some IPOs in the edtech space happening about now, education edtech space. So a number of companies about to go public.
Great.
Yeah. Well, we'll leave it open to questions. We got 5-6 minutes. Sure.
Okay, I've developed content in the STEM education area. It's a free content website with 50,000 problems and solutions for STEM subjects.
Sure.
Now, because in India and a lot of other underdeveloped or developing countries, this access to the internet is not assured and expensive. And so I have got a tablet which has all the content in it, and it doesn't require the internet.
Sure.
So, you know, I just came from India, and I've retired.
Sure.
And so I've been living there for the last 2 years.
So what's the question? So sorry to just to speed it up a bit.
So what I'm saying is, actually, this internet access is expensive, and it's not fast enough for videos, and so you have to adjust.
Of course.
To this reality.
Of course, we already talked about that. Thank you. Thank you for confirming that. Sure, go ahead.
So in the beginning, you talked about the dichotomy between the 30% and the 70%, but then we also talked about the fact that change is coming very quickly. LTE is coming at
$3 a month.
$3 a month. Okay, and then there's also some amount of social mobility because what's the 30% today was probably only 10% or 5% not that long ago.
Yeah.
So the question is, how important is it really to engineer your product to deal with the challenges that you face right now, because those challenges may not really exist even 6 months from now?
Yeah.
Oh, lovely question. Thank you very much for asking. Harman, yours. And I'll speak to it from a couple of other anecdotes from other companies we've been working with.
So you're absolutely right, and that is the way at least we in our organization think. For instance, Shantanu talked about the chip that goes in and the pre-packaged content and selling tablets and packaging of tablets. We in our organization decided not to go that way, exactly for that reason. So by the time you design that kind of technology, another 5% has broadband now. So we don't even look at our market as as an entire country, not even 30%. We just say, let's just stick to the top 15%. And for example, in our app, you can download the content, it's DRM based and all that stuff, but there's no chip that comes with it, right? You're absolutely right. The same thing happened like 3 or 4 years ago when people said, hey, India doesn't have enough smartphones. But you know what? The growth of smartphone adoption was outrageous at that time, and now everybody has one. So if you had started designing a technology 3 years ago for feature phones, you would be obsolete by now, right? So that is absolutely imperative for entrepreneurs and companies to look at that. Don't design for future obsolete technology, I would say.
Quick follow-up. So what are the enduring last mile challenges?
Yeah, which will stay, let's say, for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
I think customer acquisition is going to be a expensive proposition for any kind of content.
Yeah, that is true.
All right. The second thing is that all the content companies will have to design content which will be delivered through multimedia platforms, and they need to ensure that
what he's saying is what are going to be the constraining factors even 5 years from now. So one you said is cost of acquisition for students is increasing dramatically. I've seen the data myself over the last few years.
It's an expensive proposition.
Yeah. It's getting more and more expensive by the day. Besides that, the
challenges may not only be related to infrastructure.
Customer service, I would say.
Infrastructure issues may get solved in a couple of years' time. And that time, you'll see a lot of similarity between the Indian markets that time and US market, what you see today. Challenges will be different in terms of how do you still deliver personalization? How do you deliver better learning outcomes? How do you deliver better passing out rates? How do you deliver retentions? How do you deliver employability? I think the challenges will shift, and organizations, service providers like ours and his, I think will have to continuously innovate to ensure that they remain relevant today and tomorrow.
Yeah, I think Guy, my advice to any company innovating and wanting to get out in the emerging world in general, I think you have to look at where you want to play, which part of the market. And yes, things are changing very rapidly. I'll give you an anecdote. The gentleman from South Africa I spoke about earlier, built for feature phone, had to completely convert the platform over to smartphones because they came in a flood, but they were the cheap smartphones. So you have to build for a smaller footprint. That'll probably change as well. We have another company in India that basically was taking content and assessment platforms to schools. They were having to put a server into every school. Over the last 18 months, they've taken out every server from every school that they sold into because they can take them back up to the cloud, at least in the tier 1 and tier 2 cities, no problem at all. So it really comes down to what kind of market do you want to go after? What is your market segment? What I mean by that is, look, if you're basically playing for a tier 1, tier 2, top 30, it'll work. It's just that your numbers will get bigger while you're out there selling, because the technology will keep sort of spreading out. We went from almost nothing smartphones to 200 million smartphones, and now a whole slew of cheap smartphones hitting the market. At the same way, what will stay constant is if you're truly trying to get to the bottom of the pyramid and make a big difference, that's not going to change anytime soon. So if you're really trying to get out to that truly disenfranchised little kid out in a village with nothing, that's not going to change. And so you got to figure out what you're going to do for him. And that is a constant that cuts across Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. You take it anywhere, it's the same.
Question.
Yeah.
You had a question.
We have only 1 minute left.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Yeah.
Quickly.
It's quick. So you said education's highly aspirational. You got the 70% below. Is there real, reliable social mobility when education is achieved in India?
Yes, and we have reports on that. Absolutely. The broad sort of rule of thumb is once one person is educated, the whole family lifts out. They just move a whole generation moves up one level.
Just look at the Indian engineers in Silicon Valley. At least half of them, their families could not even afford a car back in India. right? And look at them, the multimillionaires here. That's a classic example. One person get educated. You know, we don't even need to look at the data. We just need to look around. That's all.
Oh, we see that every day. I mean, domestic help. The lady who looks after my kids in the house, her daughter is just finishing a computer science degree. She will never be a maid in somebody's house again. It's just not going to happen. It's already happened. Well, thank you very much. I think we're right on time.
Thank you.